Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan Read the Paper on Sunday, December 9th, 2018.
Right.
First things first, happy birthday shout out to our favorite bartender, Armand Evers.
Happy birthday, Armand.
He's got a birthday coming up.
Just a few days. Well, this will come out about the same time as his birthday.
It's the birthday broadcast.
That's the birthday broadcast.
And so Christmas is upon us. Right. Dixon has been decorating.
Yes.
We have illuminated characters popping up
We're
all
on to something
over.
Nobody else is on.
No, let's not go into that. Come on.
You don't want to
That's
go into
personal.
Okay. No. We have some remarkable decorations. Well, your earrings are pretty remarkable, too.
Yes, I have gotten out the $5 holiday earrings.
$5? Is that for both of them?
Yes.
That's a good deal.
Which I do love.
They are.
I do love.
They might be a little heavy.
The holiday earring.
Yeah, no, they're quite an impression. I'm sorry, everyone can't see this.
$5 is pretty much my limit.
They're well spent. That was a good investment.
Although I did invest more.
Don't tell me.
In some Thanksgiving slice of pie.
Yeah, those were good too.
Earrings.
Those were more subtle.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So in any event, we've been busy as we are. We saw two big movies. Well, no. We saw two movies.
No, we saw two obscure movies.
Two obscure movies.
That no one else in America will see.
Well, yeah, I have to say, people should know that you, Tamsen, are the champ, the initiator for obscure movies. You'll say to me, do you want to see, in this case, Bathtubs over Broadway? And I say, what?
Well, I did see a funny little ad.
Yeah.
And it was something, I had never heard of this movie, Bathtubs Over Broadway. Not that I've heard of every movie, but you get, you look at these lists of what's coming up.
Sure.
You know. And the only reason it was odd that I didn't know anything about this, the ad for it in the New York Times had some fairly big names.
Right.
And so how could, these people, Martin Short, Cheetah Rivera, I forget who else was in the ad, be in a movie and you haven't even heard of it.
Yeah, it was Florence Henderson. There were a couple folks like that. And there's an explanation. So Bathtubs Over Broadway is about industrial musicals. It is a documentary directed by a woman named Dava Wisenant and spearheaded by a fellow named Steve Young.
Well, it's the story of Steve Young's collection of industrial musical soundtracks.
Exactly. But let's explain first what industrial musical soundtrack is, because I know I've talked to people, they look at me blankly. They don't know what the heck I'm talking about. So what you had, apparently, I know this now having seen the movie with you, is during the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, you had a plethora of so-called industrial musicals, which were almost full scale, put on by large companies for their sales force, for everyone who worked for them. And there were things like Xerox Spoken Here by the Xerox Company, the Johnson & Johnson Sunscreen musical of 1978, the Seagram's Symphony. So now you get the idea.
They were many times just performed once. For the national convention.
Which is a huge number of people.
Sometimes there were more than one performances. They would be in different locales for, different...
But just a few performances. But they were written by people who wrote music for a living. They were written by... The lyricists put lyrics on it, and they had professional performers, which is why you had in some of the clips Martin Short, you had Cheetah Rivera, you had Florence Henderson, you had people like that. You
had people making a living being in these industrial musicals.
So it was a whole art form that we didn't know about, and neither did this fellow Steve Young. And he got into collecting this because he was collecting goofy records for Letterman so he can goof on.
For David Letterman's segment on weird records.
Where Young was a writer. Yeah.
And so he gets into this. And it ends up becoming a book. He writes a book. Everything's Coming Up Profits, The Golden Age of Industrial Musicals.
Right.
And that was published in 2013. And I actually heard an interview with him and others about it on Fresh Air with Terry Gross. But that was a while ago.
And you said it was very appealing. He was very appealing.
It was fascinating. I mean, it was pretty funny.
Yeah.
These anthems to, plumbing fixtures, right, etc. And there were legit writers like Sheldon Harnick.
and Jerry Bach, who wrote Fiddler on the Roof later on, and some who were legit or not legit. They didn't become famous, but a fellow named Sid Siegel wrote 50 of these things, right? And he'd be interviewed for it. Well, in any event, following the book, he actually makes this documentary film. And the film, in my mind, it's a lot to process here. There's a lot going on. It kind of operates in three levels. The first level is, what is this? And it's his own discovery, and as an audience member, you identify with this, that he peels back the layers and he finds that there's all these musicals, and they're not 7 of them. They played music from 50 different industrial musicals, and I'm sure there are many more than that. And you're going, what is this? And it's goofy, right? They're singing about, the best surgical kind of equipment you might use in a hysterectomy. They're singing about crazy stuff. But it's real, and they have the clips from them, and they have real people. So that's one level. The second level, though, is what you were talking about. And I think, and we talked about the movie afterwards, I think you were struck by this quite a bit, was the whole collector thing. The notion that people become collectors and become interested, and there's a subculture of other people.
Right. He starts this about 20 years ago.
Right.
Now the internet has made it a much more collegial endeavor.
Right.
Before it was just him alone going through stacks of LPs at flea markets or, the odd store. Now he has actually gotten acquainted with other collectors, with performers, with the writers, all because of the ease of, communication in this day and age. So maybe that's another level you were going to talk about.
Right. No. That's what I'm talking about.
Personal development.
Well, that
it becomes a social endeavor, not just a weird private obsession.
Right. That's the arc of this story. I mean, like my friend Harry was telling me, he said, no matter what subject it is, no matter how obscure in the sciences or whatever, there's someone who's made a life of studying it, and they're experts in it. And
the internet brings you together.
Closer. Yeah. So the arc of the story is this guy who clearly is a little bit, an introvert, doesn't deal with other people too smoothly. You get that impression throughout. But he starts to develop relationships with this group who's into this industrial musicals, and he becomes their friends.
Yes, right? So much so that he ends up delivering a eulogy.
Right. Yeah,
for one of the
and he clearly benefits from that. So that there's an arc.
So anyway,
but there's a third level.
A third level.
The third level is what it's not often you see a review, an article in a publication which really opens something up to you in a movie. At least I don't see it that often.
You're talking about an article in the New Yorker
by a fellow named Richard Brody, and he takes on something which is kind of lurking there, which we started to talk about, but he really explores it better than I was able to. And he says it raises no question less than, quote, what is art? And for that matter, is the conventional definition of good art too narrow to account for the merits of commercial works such as these? In other words, is this art that ought to be celebrated, ought to be studied? Is it the real thing, or is it just goofy? And he makes a case that it's the real thing. And he's not so much saying, look, he saw Bathrooms Over Broadway, and he thought it was fabulous. What he says is, what they do talk in the film about the fact that the productions are very effective in moving people. How are they moving people? They're moving the sales force to get excited about their products. They're getting them excited because they're plays about their lives. The salespeople, the workforce, are watching this, and they're seeing the issues they confront on an everyday basis being portrayed in a dramatic, exciting fashion on the stage. And they're excited by this. That's the whole point of that. And he's saying, in this article in the New Yorker...
Well, he says, actually, the tone of these shows may be hectoringly cheerful and goal-oriented, but, at least judging from the brief examples included in the movie, they suggest close ties to material life and its inextricable element of inner identity that most movies and plays can only envy.
Exactly.
So he's seeing a real value there. Now, make no mistake. Yeah. It's not like these were fabulous productions.
No. But they're succeeding.
But they are succeeding. They're succeeding in a particular context.
Right.
And that is something. People are going crazy about some of this because they're a homogeneous demographic, and they get this stuff, and it resonates with them in a way it's not going to resonate with you and me. Okay,
I agree.
Not being plumbing salespeople or whatever.
It's narrowcasting. That's what we call it, narrowcasting, in the way that cable often has a lot of narrowcasting. But he puts it in one sentence this way. He says, death of a salesman is one thing, and that these folks don't necessarily relate to, but this is life of the salesman.
Okay.
And they relate to that. And you know something? There's something to that. Yeah. Arthur Miller, doesn't have much appeal for a lot of the folks watching this. But, bathrooms, the bathrooms are coming, the bathrooms are coming. Does resonate if you're selling plumbing supplies.
Is that a play on The Russians Are Coming? Did that come out at the same time?
It did come out at the same time. I don't know if it is or it isn't.
But anyway, he says there's often a sincere and authentic spark of creative imagination and ingenuity in these. Right. So the point is not that these are amazing classics that will be with us forever, but it's astounding and a great loss to have them completely forgotten. Right. And how serendipitous that Steve Young has rediscovered them. Right. And
it's theater moving people. However, whether it's a small group or a
small
time.
It's
worthy
a great
of our
and
attention.
wonderful thing. Also, it's an entertaining movie. We saw it in an interesting movie theater that we'd never heard of before. Yeah. Landmark 57.
Which is so far west, you would think it'd be in Ohio.
12th Avenue between 57th and 58th. Right. Brand spanking new building. Right. So we're excited that it's showing these kind of small films.
Barely advertises.
And not only does it have popcorn and coffee, it has a bar, a lovely, charming bar attached.
We'll be back.
So one can sip rosé while one is waiting for one's husband to truck over from Columbus.
And you might want to do that if you're going to see Bathtubs over Broadway. So, and then we saw another movie because you said, "Can we top this with a movie equally obscure?" And you met the challenge, I think.
I had mentioned that I was intrigued by this movie, Swimming with Men, about a man turning around his midlife crisis by taking up synchronized swimming. Yeah. It's a movie from the UK, and that's very clear throughout the movie. It's starring Rob Brydon from The Trip.
Right.
Movies with Stephen
Coogan.
And
he's a funny guy. They're like a funny duo. Right. They're mildly funny as the movies go on.
Directed by Olive Parker.
Right.
And it's mildly amusing.
That's fair.
As you said when you came out, it wasn't as bad as you thought it would be.
There you go. High praise.
Pretty much I dragged you to it.
Yes.
Yeah. I felt you owed me one. For some reason. I forget why. But
tell me that later.
We did go to it, and there were 6 or 7 other people in the theater. Right. It was a late showing, 7 p.m.
Well,
late for that crowd.
Showing,
so
I don't know how
there
they got
you have
home.
it.
Yeah.
But it was pretty funny.
It's a story of a guy having a middle-age crisis who's wondering about all kinds of things, namely his life in accounting, his relationship with his wife, and he's feeling sort of disaffected in many ways. And he's a swimmer, and he discovers by accident this group of men who do synchronized swimming out of all
And so
things.
These lovingly shot underwater scenes of these not in the best shape men doing these various, hijinks in the water was kind of okay.
Oh, well, it's a male bonding
And there's
movie.
also, for our water polo fans, one of the things he needs to learn to do is egg beater.
I was wondering, is that egg beater?
That was egg beater. Yeah. And so there's quite the sequence of him shot from above and below, learning to do egg beater. And he succeeds.
It's like
it's a victorious moment.
It's like the My Fair Lady, by George, I think she's got it moment.
Yes, it's a way of treading water so that you're well above.
You're buoyant.
Yeah, you're high up.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not as high up as the water polo players, but whatever. Anyway, so there you go. Swimming with Men, not that bad.
And that one made it to New Jersey.
Yes.
So there you go. That's why
I can't imagine it's going to be here long.
No,
so
not
jump
next
on
week.
it, folks.
Yes, jump on it.
You
jump
probably want to see it on the big screen.
Yeah. I put Bathtubs a little bit above, but in any event, they're not for everyone. Think hard about those. We're not putting them in wide distribution.
Not a laugh a minute, and it's not a super happy, perfect ending.
No.
Because it's not American, it's British.
It's a little goofy. But it was cute. It was worth watching. So you're going to now marry art and technology for us, I think.
No, I'm not. But, Google wants to do that, keeps trying to
Mrs.
do that.
Google, I think.
No, why do you say, what is that? What is that nonsense?
Oh, sorry.
Art is for girls?
No. Because
seriously, Dan?
You refer to the Google woman who gives advice as Mrs. Google, but in any event, go ahead.
This is not Mrs. Google, okay?
Yes.
That is the lady who tells me where to make a left turn.
I see.
But
it's a whole different department.
There's a Google app, Google Arts and Culture.
I see.
I already have that app, okay? They have a new addition to it where they have constructed a virtual museum of all of Jan Vermeer's paintings.
Right.
This is easy to do because we don't have that many. Okay, so it's a relatively small museum, even for a virtual
Can I just jump in here as the pedestrian here, the Philistine, number one, for those like me? Vermeer did not have many paintings, that's true. And number two, Vermeer is the guy with the girl with the pearl earring.
Right, and so this is a joint venture apparently with the Maurits House.
Right.
The museum
We've been there.
Yes, and we've seen that painting there. And of course, the Maurits House just finds it hilarious. It's not that important a painting in many ways. They find it hilarious that people line up to see it like crazy.
Right.
But anyway, so you can, through the Google Arts and Culture app, tap here, click there, and go in this virtual museum that has put together all these paintings that normally aren't together, so you can walk through and see them. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's fine. I mean, as long as we understand that seeing an image, a digital image on a screen is not the same as seeing an actual painting, it's both less and more. Okay, it's more because in the best digital presentations, you can zoom in and see aspects of work you can't possibly see in a real museum where you cannot step over the line.
Right.
So there is that. That's wonderful. It still has its limitations, and I can't say that I was really successful at efficiently navigating the virtual museum. I even enlisted Granger to help me with it a bit, and it will take some practice to figure that out. But we should say Vermeer himself would have loved this idea. We think that Vermeer actually used what's called a camera obscura to set up his images. So he was not against technology in cooperation with art. So there you have it. Go to Google Arts and Culture app, and you will be immediately presented with the opportunity to see these Vermeers up close.
So Philip Bosco died. Philip Bosco, there was a time that Philip Bosco was sort of the Broadway actor in the sense that every production of note, not every production, but a lot of them had Philip Bosco. It seemed that way. And if you had an important part, Philip Bosco would be the guy that you naturally think of. Non-musicals, plays.
But for a character actor of a certain...
Yeah, it's funny. Well, that's interesting you say that. That's you say that, and that's the way the Times wrote the obituary. He died at the age of 88, and versatile character actor. I never thought of him as character actor, although when I look at the parts,
well, he was not a matinee idol.
Well, but he was older by then. But you're right, he wasn't a matinee idol, but he was kind of an actor's actor type guy, right? He's a little bit like Frank Langella. Maybe Frank Langella's a little more of a matinee idol in his younger years. But just a guy just known as a Broadway pro in a lot of fantastic productions. And frankly, a lot of George Bernard Shaw productions. But maybe that's no coincidence. They're both known for that. And I'm not going to read the list.
So he must have been good with words.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Very famous for doing Shaw. He apparently stopped performing in 2006. That's what I learned from the obituary. But just his last few productions, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which is a musical, 12 Angry Men, for which he was nominated for a Tony. He was in Carousel off-Broadway. Bloomer Girl, The Visit. You remember The Visit. Copenhagen is interesting because we saw Copenhagen in London, and that's a story of Niels Bohr, and how central that part is.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, I just remember at the time when I knew they had to cast in New York, and I said to myself, I wonder who they're going to cast. And I said, it has to be Philip Bosco. And it was.
Right. Daniel, please.
Oh, yes.
It's easy to say this decades later.
No one doubts
I would have cast Philip.
Strike Up the Band, Encores. We saw him in that. We saw him in a lot of stuff, frankly. But you're right. He was often as a character actor. He did get a Tony for Lend Me a Tenor. He was in Heartbreak House several times. Just sort of, an actor's actor. And it's probably fairly, as you put it, sort of a character actor. But a guy who was a staple of Broadway. And really, I always found him always interesting. Also, I should just say, a lot of television and even a fair bit of films besides. But a great actor.
All right. Well, also, you pointed out to me an article about the death of a YouTube chef star at age 107. Mm-hmm. She's from India? Yes?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
And her name was Mastanama. Okay, who became a YouTube star at apparently the age of 105.
Right.
Her great-grandson started filming her cooking. Mm-hmm. And so she seemed like a delightful person, a real sense of humor, among other things. And I did watch one of her videos of her cooking chicken, a chicken dish cooked in a hollowed-out watermelon.
Yeah, I was wondering about
over open flames.
How do you do that?
Well, one of her relatives, apparently, her assistant, hollowed out a watermelon. Took the watermelon meat out. Yeah. And she munches on it, he munches on it.
And the chicken's in the watermelon.
And then they put the chicken and other spices and ingredients into the watermelon. Yeah. Then they seal it closed. The watermelon's been cut in half, hollowed out, and then put back together. Yeah. Sealed with like a, pastry seal. And then it's set over coals and roasted for a long time.
But what happens to the watermelon rind when it's set on the coals?
It just roasts. It gets charred.
Right. And you don't eat that. You just peel that off and eat the chicken.
Right, and get the chicken dish from inside.
I see.
And
we can do that. I can look forward to that.
Yes, we could do that. All right. So, something to think about.
Yeah.
More retirement projects.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mastanama.
Yeah.
And also, did you want me to mention the killer of the man-eating tiger story?
There's not a lot to say, but just it's a follow-on to what we had mentioned before, that they were trying to catch this man-eating tiger who had killed 13 people. And it is an issue in India because the suburbs have encroached on the lands where tigers generally roam.
On the other hand, tigers are protected, right?
Yeah, so it is an issue. And they eventually decided that the court order allowed some kind of a hunt. They did the hunt. We talked about the fact that they were using Polo, a fragrance, to attract the animal, because apparently all kinds of cats love that fragrance, and they succeeded. They shot the animal, sort of went for the bait. They shot the tiger with a dart, a tranquilizer dart. And then what happened is, in debate, what happened next, according to some, is that the tiger, even after having been shot with the dart, lunged at one of those present with a rifle, and in self-defense he shot it, and the tiger was killed. Others felt that the shooting was not justified, and they're going back to court.
Do we have a video?
No, we don't have it. Well, I don't have the video.
It sounds a lot like one of those.
It'll show up.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, look, inevitably that was going to happen. Inevitably they're going to find the tiger. Inevitably it wasn't going to work out well, given everything's at stake, and people are going to complain. And, who knows? But it's kind of a very strange story. Debate as to whether a tranquilizer dart really takes a tiger out or doesn't, and how quickly that works.
All right, I got it. Let's move on here.
You done with that story?
I'm done with that story.
Oh, here's another story that I won't spend much time on.
I hope not, because it's got physics.
Yes, well, no, it doesn't. But this is Einstein's 1954 God letter, it's known. Einstein wrote a letter in response to a book by a fellow named Eric Gutkind, wrote Choose Life, the Biblical Call to Revolt. Nobody remembers that book anymore, but people got excited about
The what?
the biblical call to revolt. I don't know anything about
Call to revolt.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Einstein.
I understand, but I want to know what you're saying.
All right, well, that's a switch. But in any event, Einstein writes a letter in response. And that's a collector's item, and they're bidding for it, and it's worth $1 zillion because it's Einstein talking about
Well, it's sold for...
What did it sell for?
$2.9 million.
Yeah, well, that's just money. Well, we're not hung up on money.
I understand.
We're interested in the letter.
But it's only in the newspaper because it's sold for 2.9.
That's their problem.
Right.
But the point is, it's Einstein. Look, Einstein, a lot of people like to think about how Einstein thought about religion and God because he was...
A lot of people.
Everybody I know.
Obviously.
The people watching the movie, the swimming, whatever. But in any event, so Einstein was, he had this complicated relationship with religion and with God because quantum mechanics even challenges whether there's randomness in the universe. And his famous quote there is, God does not throw dice. And he had a difficulty accepting quantum mechanics for that reason. That has to do with the spinning of protons and neutrons and the like. But without getting too deeply into that, the letter here is a letter in which Einstein rejects the idea of a God who plays an active part in everyday life or answers individual prayers, but at the same time, he evinces, according to the Times at least, an enthrallment with Judaism, and he said he was proud to be a Jew. The actual quote from the letter that's considered pertinent is this. This is Einstein's words. The word God is for me nothing but the expression of and product of human weaknesses. The Bible a collection of venerable but still rather primitive legends. No interpretation, no matter how subtle, can for me change anything about this. Well, it's kind of interesting. It's thought-provoking, not surprisingly, it is Einstein. So, in any event, a lot of people have that philosophy. He's not...
Yet they're not getting 2.9 for their letters, are they?
The Times brings it down to earth by saying Einstein did not believe that God really favored particular sports teams. For those of us who are wondering, he was on to that. Yes. Okay,
we better get a hold of that letter.
Yeah. All right.
That's going to be worth a lot,
Let's talk about mysteries of life. The other mystery of life.
Let's talk about geniuses.
Well,
geniuses in the animal world.
No, I thought we were going to talk about tuna first, actually. The other mystery of life is why...
No, I think it's a better segue if we talk about geniuses.
All right, we'll talk about genius. We'll come back to tuna.
Okay, and then, all right, you'll see how this works in a moment. Stay tuned.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so remember I read that fun book, What a Fish Knows.
Yes,
by
I forgot about that.
Richard Balcombe.
Yeah.
All right.
I was about the only person reading that book.
I still recommend that book. It's amazing what fish know,
and it's
fish
a thick
can
book.
do.
It's a very thick book.
There was an article this week about the octopus. Mm-hmm. The title of the article, this was in the New York Times, Yes, the octopus is smart as heck, but why? And it was a story about just how smart the octopus is. And they said, perhaps you have seen a video that's making the rounds of an octopus taking two halves of a coconut shell and hiding in them, pulling them together and hiding inside. And then once the danger has passed, actually crawling out of the coconut shells, stacking them, and taking them with him or her.
This reminds me of
as if not only does the octopus know how to use these in times of danger, but has a sense that they may be useful in the future as well. That sounds really smart.
You know what it reminds me of also? It reminds me of the chicken and the watermelon. It's a similar image, if you will.
Anyway, so the octopus is very, very smart.
Right.
Okay. And that's just interesting because although we know the octopus is smart, it doesn't seem smart. It doesn't seem to have the same hallmarks of intelligence that other animals seem to have. Okay. Other animals that are credited with being very smart seem to live a long time. Okay.
Right.
And they also seem to be very social. The octopus dies young, lasts 1 to 2 years, at the most. They don't seem to form social bonds. Mm-hmm. They don't stay with their mates. They don't bother raising their young. Okay, so how does this all work? The article also mentions that they have something, I don't know, 3 hearts and a big brain. They've got a lot of fabulous stuff, but these other limitations. Turns out the octopus is actually sort of descended from the snail. At a certain point, 275 million years ago, the octopus evolves, drops the shell that the snail has, and now runs around naked. This is handy in some ways because it can get in places that it couldn't get with that big old shell it was hauling around, but makes the octopus more vulnerable. So it has to get smarter to make up for that.
That's why it carries around the coconut, so we can get the shell back.
Yeah, it can also do that with like 2, sort of clamshells or whatever, right? It can put those together and do the same thing. So it has all these strategies, but the point is it seems to operate differently than these other smart animals. And so the grad student from Cambridge who is studying animal intelligence, a Mr. Amadio, says we can't take for granted there's just one way to intelligence. There could be other paths. Ooh, late-breaking news.
Well, it sounds like the
Einstein
thing.
But I do think it's fun. Did you know that snails can actually use their shells as a flotation device? By filling them with gas. By farting into their shells.
Really?
They can stay buoyant when they need to. So that seems handy as well.
Let me answer your question. No, I didn't know that.
Well, now you know. Yeah. All right, so speaking of underwater delights.
No, hold on. Let me do this first, then we'll go back to that. Okay? All right? Do you want... What? Okay, let me do this first. Paul Gregory. Paul Gregory passed away. All right? Paul Gregory. Who is Paul Gregory, you're wondering?
Not wondering.
You're not wondering. Paul Gregory is, the headline of Times is Showman Whose Fame Flared and Flickered is Dead at 95. So this is an interesting story. So this guy in the 1950s and 60s becomes an extraordinary producer, or producer extraordinaire. And he's just from the middle part of the country, and he makes some connections with some big-time actors, whatever. And he decides that the way to do things is to put on these stripped-down productions of often classical-type pieces, sometimes readings, sometimes stagings with 4 actors doing something. And it becomes, for a short period of time, a great sensation on Broadway.
Well, it's not 10 minutes or something.
No,
it's
for
like
years.
A couple of decades, he makes this format work.
That's right.
And he makes a lot of money from it.
Yes, but think about it. You wouldn't think that this would necessarily work. I mean, he gets together with Charles Laughton, who was a great speaking actor, a great English actor. He also does some George Bernard Shaw readings of Man and Superman. He has these readings of Don Juan in Hell with Charles Laughton, Charles Boyer, Cedric Hardwicke, and Agnes Moorehead. The Times says it's mighty and moving. He does a reading of John Brown's Body. The Times says it's mellow and magical. He stages the Caine Mutiny. Originally, we talked about Bosco was in it later on, but it was first in the 50s. And they're all the spoken word. And he invests heavily in the spoken word. He strips out all the sets, everything that interferes with just hearing the spoken word. And he achieves in a huge way with these stripped down productions. It becomes his trademark.
Yeah, but I think it totally makes sense.
Does it?
Because these are all writers,
all right,
with whom it is the words that matter. Okay? And if you have people who can really present that, what else do you need? You don't need all the razzle-dazzle, all the Deus Ex Machina machinery on the stage. Okay? It makes sense to me that it works with these people at this time. Now, people get inured to it. People get, fine, that's good. Okay, let's move on. And then they want the razzle-dazzle back.
Right.
I understand that it's not going to last forever, but I can see how it can work. What I can't see, or what I think is really tragic about this whole story is, at a certain point, his career's over.
Right.
And he becomes, he teaches a little, he does other stuff, but we entirely forget him.
Right.
Okay? And so much so that when he dies, and it seems it may have been of a self-inflicted gunshot at age 95, no one notices.
Right.
He died, when was it?
2 years ago.
And
the obituaries in the Times now because no one knew he died.
Right.
Yeah. You're right.
And even in the area where he was living,
in Arizona,
the obituary is published quite a bit after the fact.
Right.
And friends who were having a memorial service happened to notice that there's a notice in the paper now. I mean, they knew.
Yeah.
But the world didn't know.
Yeah. Look, it was things going in and out of style, and he was the toast of the town, and then he wasn't. Anyway, it's an interesting theatrical career I frankly didn't know very much about. It's an interesting style, which there's logic behind it, as you described, but I can't say it's always in style. I'm not sure it's in style now. But he did a lot of groundbreaking stuff. And
it is in style. You know, it's not that far from what John Doyle is doing with his productions.
Well, and yet that's not a huge commercial success. That's just something that's off-Broadway nipping at the edges. Maybe it'll catch on. I don't know.
It just shows you that magical things are happening all the time.
Yeah.
They won't necessarily be eternally renowned.
No. It's theater. It's it goes back to the Bathtubs over Broadway. You do what you do. You have your moment, whether the people in the theater or a bathroom salesman or somebody else, whether they're excited for the moment or excited for the next 20 years.
Somebody may notice, but on the other hand,
it's still a passing moment.
Right.
Okay. Tuna.
So talking about passing moments.
Yes.
You're ruining all my segues here,
I'm sorry.
Okay? We're really going to have to call the producer in at a certain point and go over this. Because I just wanted to bring up this kerfuffle about the Strand bookstore.
Oh.
Okay?
All right,
speaking of words and love of words, etc. All right, the Landmarks Commission is trying to wants to designate the Strand, the famous Strand bookstore at Broadway and 12th in Greenwich Village as a protected landmark. Give it status as a landmark so that the building is protected.
Right.
And the owner of the Strand, Mrs. Wyden, what is her first name? Ms. Wyden. Anyway, who is, descended from the family who originated it, is fighting this designation, okay? Because it will constrain how she can operate the building, what can be done to the building. We know that bookstores operate on a thread as it is. And even it's an 11-story building that her family bought some years ago. They had rented for years there. But to protect their business, they bought the building. It's 11 stories. 6 stories are rented out to other businesses. 5 stories are used by the Strand itself. She says right now she could make more money by renting out the whole building instead of running the bookstore. But she is committed to running the bookstore. But she is fighting being designated as a landmark. And we know that that's problematic. Once you're a landmark, you really are constrained about how the building can be used, and what kind of renovations and alterations can be done to the building. So much so that this came up when we were in Bruges this summer with all these fabulous, historic, beautiful buildings in the old part of Bruges. And on the first store, they have businesses and the upper stories are vacant because you can't alter the buildings, and the only egress into the upper stories is through the first story itself. And because no business owner wants people trucking through their business to get to apartments or offices on the next story, they can't be used at all.
And as a result, they're all broken down and decrepit.
They are deteriorating because they cannot be used and they cannot be renovated.
They're right in the center of town.
So that's one example. There are many other examples of landmark status really constrained.
Well, the other thing about this from a higher level is these people are talking about landmarking the space, these legislators. They think they're doing them a favor. They think they're doing the Strand a favor. We're going to landmark your bookstore. They're so clueless. And the people who run the bookstore say, no, you're killing the bookstore by landmarking the bookstore. You're landmarking the building, which limits what we can do as a bookstore. And the politicians won't hear it. Right. They said, no, work out for you.
Well, interestingly, she's married to a senator.
Right.
Ron Wyden.
In Oregon.
You're right. Whom she met.
Right.
While she was at Powell's bookstore,
in
which
Portland.
is that cool Portland bookstore.
What's the closest thing I can think of to the Strand?
What a romantic story.
Yes, it is.
But anyway, so she has some help in that regard. She also has some celebs behind her, like Fran Lebowitz, etc., who says, I understand about Landmark, but how can you ever go against a bookstore?
Right, yeah.
So anyway... back to tuna. I've almost lost my enthusiasm for this story, but let's just say there were, in all the press, all over the place, there was the story of millennials don't eat canned tuna fish.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of fun reasons for why they don't. One was they don't own can openers.
Yeah.
And the reply to that was, most of us still live with our parents, and they have can openers.
Yeah.
So that's not really the story.
They can't be hard to get.
So the question is, why not? It's also just odd that tuna fish salad, such a ubiquitous menu item, for most of the time we've been alive.
Well, look,
apparently people don't eat that
we grew
so
up
much
with
anymore.
When school lunch, the standard school lunch is tuna fish salad. If you did a family feud with any family, in our era, or even 20 years after that, and say, what's the ubiquitous school lunch? It's tuna fish sandwich.
Right. But apparently not so much anymore.
I guess.
Because they say it's not about can openers or even mercury or any of that stuff. It's just gross.
Well, okay. All right. Never thought of it as gross, but I guess we have a fancier group of people than we used to have.
But you can also get tuna fish in pouches. You can get it fresh. You can get it frozen.
Yeah, you can access
And really wonderful preserved tuna fish comes in jars. You can buy you can pay quite a lot of money for jarred tuna fish from Italy. That is actually quite wonderful.
I agree, but whether tuna fish salad from a can is strictly tuna or something else, it's pretty good. You can have pretty good tuna fish salad. And you were telling me you guys at your shop used to make a pretty good tuna fish salad.
Wonderful tuna fish salad.
From cans.
Yeah.
All right. So there you go. We don't want to lose that. Okay. And we're finally going to end with this. One final obituary. Charles Harrison passed away. He was a designer. And he designed some amazingly, icons in terms of products, really important products. And
well, he was an industrial designer.
Industrial designer, I should say that.
Okay, so you wonder if any of his products ended up in a musical.
No.
But here are the things that are interesting about him. Yeah. For one, some of the products that he worked on that we are quite familiar with, being elderly. One is the Viewmaster.
Oh, everyone knows the Viewmaster.
Okay, so
elderly.
He redesigned the Viewmaster in 1958.
Again, that's so you see things in 3D, right?
Right.
Okay.
With the dial.
With the dial.
That is descended from the stereograph,
which was
machine.
But how cumbersome was that?
It was very cumbersome. Okay.
So this guy's a genius.
And it was two images on these panels.
It was impossible.
And then somebody took it on and devised that dial.
Right.
Okay, that had the images on it. All right,
that's him.
No. That preceded him.
Oh, is that right?
He designed a new format, a new case,
plastic case,
a way of presenting it.
Okay,
that was better. And he also redesigned the Kenmore sewing machine.
Right. His
big thing, which I think is interesting, what he strove to do with all of his designs was to make their use self-evident.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important design element, to make something that reveals its function, especially if it's functional. Okay?
Yeah.
It doesn't hide it.
Oh.
Also, what's interesting, he was an African American.
Right.
He had a really tough time, even though his work was very good. He got great recommendations from his teachers. He had a tough time getting a job. And Sears actually said to him that they had an unspoken rule against hiring African Americans. for these kinds of jobs. And they used him on a freelance basis and then eventually took him on full time.
Right.
So, and he continued to work. He eventually will become a teacher and will make a point of mentoring African American students and helping them get a place at the table, as one of his students said. That was a big part of his work.
He has a whole bunch of products that they're obviously he's a very important designer. I mean, his favorite product, as described in the obituary, is the large trash can, the rubber trash can that we all use when we put out our trash and recycling, which was, remember we all grew up with steel trash cans. And now
the galvanized aluminum.
Yeah, and now it's been for a long time. It's been a rubber product, which is lighter and easier and holds much. And as he put it, no more clanging of those aluminum trash cans in the morning.
Life-changing.
Life-changing.
So let's hear it for industrial design, industrial musicals.
I guess
we're
that's
all
the
about
theme.
industry.
That's right.
This time.
And it's artistic in its own way.
All right, so that's all we got.
And so that's it. Yeah, for Tamsen, Dan, read the paper. Dan Abuhoff.
And Tamsen Granger. See you next week.
Bye-bye.